go back as far as the first CBI, just to get, again, some facts on the table. The first CBI that was introduced in Congress contained duty rate concessions down to zero, free trade one way, for all the products that were at that time already a part of the generalized system of preference, which we give to all countries. Because that meant that the duty costs, the duty savings that were available to the region at that moment were in fact zero. They were able, for the most part, for everything that was given. Added a couple of provisions that made it possible, theoretically, for the excluded product sectors, textiles, apparel, footwear, leather goods, etc., and those are principal ones, to obtain duty-free, total duty-free access into the United States if you were using all U.S. components. In that respect, I think it was about $100 million theoretically available to trade that could have been eligible for duty concessions. Now we have a situation where the Mexican Free Trade Area will be providing, in some cases, immediate duty elimination for that group of products that I just mentioned that have been excluded from CBI. Textiles, apparel, leather-related products, and footwear. I put footwear. The total amount of trade now in these products, trade is something in the order of $2.4 billion. The industry estimates apparel to be an average duty rate of around 8%. Multiply it out yourselves, and you're talking a very, very significant yearly duty savings if this stuff went to the same status as the Mexican. In other words, an awful lot of budgetary as well as trade concession impact if we were in a position to equalize the Caribbean situation for the Caribbean basin with Mexico. That, in effect, is the central issue that we've been grappling with and working on for the last couple of years. How to achieve an equal, at least an equal, duty treatment with Mexico so that in this very large and significant group of sewn products, and that's what of course wins, they're all sewn, whether it's a camera bag or apparel, it's a sewn product, to get those onto the same level as Mexico. Chandri is, I think, going to speak to some of the details of the Mexican agreement and how what I just described in its broadest terms can be achieved in the apparel sector, what the viewpoint is of how to go about it. But the reason I wanted to go back to CBI 1 and introducing this is because I wanted you to see the difference in terms of the effort that will be required as between moving from a trade effort that had no immediate budgetary duty impact to one that will have a major duty and budget impact, and which in fact swamps, theoretically, the impact of the Mexican Free Trade Agreement, because trade in these products is 2.5 times in the Caribbean and total as it is in Mexico. So there is a very significant impact. The next thing I wanted to say about it, I and Chandri have spoken to in the Congress, in the committees responsible for trade, have discussed the issue of reciprocity. Now, that is not to say that this bill itself will contain reciprocity in some way, shape, or form. No, it's certainly going to have to be something that I can see in terms of market access. In order to facilitate discussion, Marlon is going to hand out excerpts from the talk that I did in the Dominican Republic. What's in this piece of paper is a description cases, some of this is just surface. It's not actually what might have driven certain sectoral advisors reporting private sector interests to support these initiatives. But the point is, this is the story. As the public receives it and as the public gets to view the justification for taking action. So what I wanted to say to the group is, here's an opportunity to look on my piece of paper what it is that the private sector said they got. They looked good. And I point out, by the way, I pointed out in my speech in Chile, there's a line in here about the last gap review of Chile's trade policy. And I think I've quoted from the IPC document. And what I said down there is that whether you like it or not, it's a goddamn good report card. You know, and this kind of stuff and the way American politics seems to be playing out, getting a good report card counts for something. And I think that issue of getting that report card stated and stated well for the region, for me, is an important part of the overall strategy. And that has not been done. I mean, with all due respect for what I heard from Eddie about the duty rates and so forth, I don't think we've come to the point yet through Central America or the Caribbean where that report card has come out in some way that the public and the consuming private sector advisory group can see it. I talked around to a bunch of people who sit on these industry advisory committees. The U.S. government, they haven't had any discussions of this in the last 2 years or 3 years. There's been no discussion of Caribbean issues in these committees where something could come out on paper. Now, obviously, there was the Mexican thing, but still, I still feel there's a lot of ground to cover to get the report card. Can I keep going, please? Yeah. Strategy. Steve will make his comment. I think that the strategy here to get CBI enhancement package, which in effect is the carrying and maybe some other things we go into, boils down to 2 of 3 groups to support it. Now, when you look at the sector advisory report on NAFTA, you can see, what I see is this. There are 3 kinds of reports. There's the import-export community, who basically says, looks at it, what can I save moving my goods back and forth? Customs administration issues, the reform of the customs people, the customs group, a whole series of related matters that makes the thing get cheaper to move the goods without, a lot of lawyers. And by the way, Sandler and Travis sits on one of the key groups that I'm referring to, the Functional Advisory Committee on Customs. And that group spans a lot of different segments, but the people on that group are special kind of people. The second group of ISAC was primarily commenting on what I would call the new rules of engagement. Rules of engagement are the IPR matters, the investment policy reforms, things that cover a broad range of issues of how you, in effect, enter into the economy of that country. That's another group of companies and sectors. And finally, there's a group over on the side that I would call, they didn't care. They're not investing in Mexico. They see it from a standpoint of strict bilateral reciprocity. Am I going to move more of my trade in there, or are they going to move more of their trade into my country? They look at duty reciprocity, etc. That group, that's the third group. I think our strategy has to maintain focus on the first 2 groups and try in some way to neutralize the third group, because the third group doesn't trade with your country to a degree, to an extent, in the auto sector, that they're going to have a major stake in this bill going through. And in this country, I can't speak for you, in this country, we've got a private sector group that is fairly neutral on a trade issue. The way they fall is negative. Absolutely. They're going to take the negative view of the bill because they're going to say, I'm going to buy something for myself someplace else. There's no win. So they turn on us as protectionists. So I would think that we have to stay down the line with what I would call the rules of engagement folks and the import-export folks who do have a diet, my colleague here from Kelwood, I mean, if you can bring your goods in for an extra 5% cheaper because there's been some kind of liberalization or some kind of reform, that makes sense for you. You become an asset to our efforts. On the rules of engagement people, the collective property rights, etc., they have a global agenda. They have certain kinds of rules they want to harmonize on. They're not going to be very, very country specific in this effort. They're going to want to look at, are you going to buy off on our general agenda? Because for them, they can't begin to give up. They've got such a high standard that they've achieved in Mexico in terms of the agreement. They can't go backwards. If they begin to feel that the rules in the region are somehow much lower than what you're according in property rights, much lower than what Mexico is willing to sign on to, they then sign on to this bill. In effect, they're saying, we don't care, we'll take a lower standard. I don't think they can afford, given where they're coming from, that's where the standards are elevated very high in Mexico. And that's, I think I quoted it in the paper too. I mean, they're very excited about what's in that region. And that's a challenge. I mean, it's just truly a challenge to be faced. True enough, you can always come to an agreement with Mr. Gillespie from the Motion Picture Association about cable channels, because it's a dollar and cent issue. And on some of these broader issues, that's the role of property rights. There isn't going to be easy to get them to endorse this bill, but at the same time they're doing it up. I think we've got a winner. I think it can be done, even with the problems that lie ahead. And I think that, I'm suggesting as a
special access quotas for 807A products in the Caribbean and Central America, issues that anyone talks about, intellectual property rights, market access, and sits down and signs or starts to negotiate anyway a free trade agreement. There is some truth. There are obviously some companies that have closed up shop and moved out. So you don't want to bring a lot of attention. I argue in the apparel industry that no, that
John, you're arguing about the wrong issue. There is look at just one to Mexico. You haven't looked at my letter to the White House guy in the back. Don't fight it don't fight it on Nightline, because that's your CBI on. You take the CBI on that.
John, you're absolutely correct, John. But the issue that you face, and what happens in a case like this, first goes the apparel police. They say, I don't want to say anything in public. I have one cut in my hand. I'm going to end up. It's better that I produce quietly in a region, do all these good things for the United States, do all these good things for other people. Now, you raised one good point. You raised many good points, but you raised one particular point, which actually was the subject I had over the weekend, was General Motors pulled this thing out. Because they did have a lot of money on their side. That's happened. You're going to get killed. But you sit there. The thing that I love the best argument was where they had the one on El Salvador. Remember, they talked about poor Miss Martinez, who was getting 59 cents an hour, and then her wage went down to 59 cents an hour. You know why her wage went down to 39 cents an hour? Because it was an evaluation in El Salvador. But all I'm saying is that Peter is absolutely correct. First, you won't have companies who will come out and want to be part of the debate, and I don't blame them. And secondly, you wait for the right time for it to come in. But you do make a good point. Undercut for the first time the effectiveness of some of these smear news magazines that are on television, and maybe in a few months we may have our opportunity to hit back, and all the information that everybody around the room has been collecting will just come out. But I agree 100%. You don't respond immediately because you just get killed at that moment.
Additionally, if Singapore says, go and sell the garments in Thailand, we want higher grade jobs from the United States. Is that Clinton's vision for the future of the American people?
Well, I think that's why Peter's right. We have to go and educate them and inform them. But if you talk to the folks who are powerful,
Their social benefits, sometimes going back to the third world. Father always told his son, walk beside a man with a full car. Something will go home. American have a full car.
So just to wrap up, we're looking at a bill that's probably going to come out.
Last year, the government decided to do a study called the potential effects of North American free trade and apparel in the region. This document is a poison pill to the whole effort. And the people that asked for it made a big, big mistake as far as I'm concerned, and I was Carl Hill to it. They put out a document that can be interpreted a couple of ways. But basically, it went right to the argument that we had to use to winning the case, which is NAFTA will affect the textile sector in the region adversely. And they came up with a study that doesn't exactly say, absolutely, you're right. Now, the reason I mention that is I want to just one more time go back to this issue of the regional attitude towards this game. Because if you go in and sit down and you got a pretty good case on this apparel, and you can argue it. I can lie if I have to. But if you go, I happen to have heard that the Dominican Republic, where you get still the largest, I think, exporter, that these companies lose on the average of 8-10% in cost because the Customs Administration is so screwed up and they can't get their goods out. And you want me to save the money? Why don't they fix their own game up down there first? And that's what we're going to hear. And that's why I want to go back to the fact that, to me, taking on the labor group straight on, that's not going to help me. I mean, we don't need Peter sitting in front of Sam Gibbons at a committee meeting taking on the labor issue. You're going to find everybody on that committee will walk out of the room. They're going to want to get something that looks like it's a fair deal, that the world has gotten better because CBI is leading the damn through. And that's really, I think, the key part of the strategy effort. Head on with labor. And, a lot of people have tried it, and it's not a victory. It's not a way to get victory. The way to get victory is having a line that is absolutely workable. And that involves more than
My other concern is get it through, attach it to the NAFTA
Good.
Do we have any feeling?
The latest I heard is that maybe not.
From that level up to a broader political level, top policy guys in that domain, I think there's an industry view, my guess would be, I didn't know this, industry view, but carry through with that narrow textile, where there could be damaging for it.
we really need to get onto that aspect of that next cycle.
That goes to our broader concept of, the whole thing is not better together, but maybe not.
Canada feels stuff sometimes. I remember high school. Canada would be on our side because they don't so down. What they're doing is they're more likely to support them. And then you have at least one of the partners out there. Plus, that is just their pride alone. Can't they always get for nothing? This is called the second stage. So when you recognize their position in the field, you're going to have a likely win.
Continue this question. I was going to let Steve go ahead and put it all on the table.
Yeah, well, I'm sure I'm going to have comments on whatever Steve says, as I normally do, but I think it's going to be very important that the draft of that bill, and as Andrew's talking about, be sent down in certain Central America and the Caribbean, so we can evaluate it, comment on it, and insofar as it's possible, begin to start building a constituency for each elements of it. Because although I take on board what John was saying, or what Caribbean government ideally ought to do. The political fact of life is that they're not going to do it. That there's a lot still of deep-rooted restrictions and far more concentration on the challenges and problems of NAFTA than the opportunities in here. And not only on the part of government, but on a wide cross-section of the private sector. And we got a hell of an uphill job of persuasion and argument so on to do in the private sector as well as we have across the Caribbean. And therefore we've got to be very aware when something is important as that transition will come. To get the draft early, to look at it and start arguing against it before. Not going to be.
Well, I think we're in agreement that language, that piece of paper has got to be the galvanizing element as we try to pull all this stuff together. Steve,
The way to do the third piece of the change is I don't have to go through each of the steps and I can take advantage of the first two approaches. To perhaps start off on a very optimistic note